Do you know what it feels like when your home stops being safe? Not broken into, not robbed, just wrong. When the walls feel like they're listening, when the silence lasts a little too long, and when the people you love are trapped in something no one else can see. This happened in 1993. A family left their small apartment in Brooklyn, New York, hoping for a quieter life across the river, in a modest apartment complex in suburban New Jersey. It wasn't a dream home, but it was affordable, and it was supposed to be temporary. The father worked overseas on a long-term construction contract. He sent money home every month. The mother, a public school teacher, stayed behind with 4 children, holding the family together with routines, discipline, and quiet prayers whispered after midnight. The apartment looked normal. 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, an old television in the living room, a small balcony overlooking a dark parking lot where the lights flickered at night. Nothing felt dangerous at first. Then the small things started happening. The mother would wake up and find cash under her pillow, bills folded neatly, money she didn't remember placing there. Rings appeared in drawers where she never kept them. Keys changed places. Objects moved just slightly, just enough to make her doubt herself. She blamed exhaustion, stress, single parenting. She told herself this over and over. But the patterns didn't stop. The neighbors were distant. The apartments above and below were empty. Sound felt absorbed, like the walls were swallowing it. At night, corners of the rooms felt deeper, darker, as if the shadows were stretching. One evening, trying to distract the kids, the family rented a horror movie from a local video store. The lights were off, the curtains closed. The television glow was the only thing breathing in the room. Halfway through the movie, a violent bang exploded from the kitchen. Not a crash, an impact. The mother stood up, heart racing, and walked toward the sound. The kitchen light flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Before she could reach the switch, the ceiling tube light fell on its own, shattering against the floor. Glass everywhere. The children screamed. In the darkness, the apartment felt awake. She turned on an emergency lamp. The kitchen looked untouched, except for the broken glass. No loose wiring. No explanation. When they returned to the living room, the TV was no longer playing the movie. Only static. The sound hissed softly like breathing. That night, the mother felt it for the first time. As she lay in bed, something pressed down on her chest. Her body wouldn't move. Her mouth wouldn't open. She was awake. She knew she was awake, and she felt watched. This happened again and again, night after night. Sleep paralysis, doctors would later say. Stress-induced hallucinations. But the weight felt real. The presence felt deliberate. Objects kept moving. Cold spots appeared in warm rooms. Footsteps echoed when no one was home. Her health began to collapse. Weight loss, insomnia, constant fear. Then came the night that changed everything. The eldest daughter, home from college, woke up screaming. She said someone was cutting her leg with a saw. There was no wound, no blood, but the pain was real to her. Too real. The mother understood then. Whatever was happening wasn't only happening to her. The apartment had become something else. Not a shelter, not a home. A place where fear lived quietly, patiently. And this was only the beginning. The days after the kitchen incident didn't pass normally. They stretched, collapsed, blurred together like a dream that refused to end. The family tried to act normal. They cleaned the apartment. They forced smiles. They slept with lights left on in every room. But the apartment had already changed. Every sound felt deliberate. Every shadow felt placed there on purpose. The mother, Laura, began noticing small things that made her pulse spike. A cup on the counter she didn't remember using. A door frame where shadows lingered just a second too long. Whispers she tried to dismiss, until she realized they were too clear to be imagination. Her husband was overseas, working construction contracts in the Middle East. Long hours, short calls, static-filled phone lines that cut out without warning. She couldn't tell him what was happening. Not fully. How do you explain that your home feels occupied? That objects shift when no one is there? That something presses down on your chest at night and won't let you scream? The children were changing too. The oldest daughter woke up one night sobbing, convinced something had tried to cut her leg. There were no marks, but the pain, she said, felt real. The youngest son, only 10, started waking up gasping for air. He said invisible hands pulled him toward the corners of his room, the darkest corners, where the light never stayed. Sleep stopped being rest. Bedrooms stopped feeling safe. Laura told herself it was stress. That fear was spreading through the family. That this was psychological. Until the nights took something from her too. Every time she lay down, her body locked in place. Eyes open. Mind awake. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. And then it came. Pressure on her chest. Hands pinning her down. Cold. Heavy. It felt like the walls themselves were leaning inward. Eventually, she contacted a local clergy member. Not because she believed in hauntings, but because she had run out of explanations. He walked through the apartment slowly, quietly, noticing things she hadn't mentioned. Objects slightly misplaced. Rooms where the air felt wrong. He suggested routines. Prayers. Specific words spoken at specific times. Laura followed everything. For a while, it worked. The objects stopped moving. The pressure faded. The apartment felt calm again. Too calm. 2 months later, trying to feel normal, the family rented a VCR and a few horror movies from a local video store. They told themselves it was harmless. Just movies. Just noise. They laughed. They relaxed. They almost forgot. Almost. Because whatever lived in that apartment was patient, and it had only been waiting. Halfway through the second movie, it happened. A sudden explosion-like crash tore through the apartment, loud enough to shake the walls. It came from the kitchen. Laura froze. Her heart spiked before her mind could catch up. The children screamed as the ceiling tube light ripped free and slammed onto the floor, exploding into glass and sparks. The room filled with panic, crying, and the sharp smell of burnt wiring. They grabbed the emergency lamp and rushed in. The kitchen was untouched. No signs of damage. No loose screws. No faulty wiring. Just the light. On the floor. As if something had pushed it down. From that moment on, whatever had been hiding in the apartment stopped pretending. The attacks began. Every night, Laura woke up unable to move. Her eyes open. Her body frozen. Something pressed down on her chest. Heavy. Deliberate. Her lungs fought for air while an unseen presence lingered beside her bed. Quiet, patient, watching. She could feel it waiting. Not rushing. Not angry. Just certain. The children weren't spared. Her eldest daughter, Emily, started screaming in her sleep almost every night. She said shadows were cutting at her legs, gnawing at her skin. She clawed at herself, sobbing, insisting she could feel it happening. The younger kids were too small to explain what they saw. They just woke up shaking, crying, refusing to sleep alone. Laura tried to stay strong. She had to. Fear wasn't an option, not in front of her children. But her body began to give in. She lost weight fast. Sleep came in fragments. Her thoughts never stopped racing, always waiting for the next sound, the next crash, the next scream. She tried calling her husband overseas. The lines were bad. Calls dropped. Messages went unanswered. Eventually, she started writing letters. Long ones. She wrote about the noises, the pressure at night, the children's screams. No reply ever came. Then Emily's terror escalated. One night, she woke up screaming louder than ever before. This time she said she saw it clearly. An invisible figure standing over her bed, holding a saw. She said it leaned in close. Close enough that she could feel its breath. Laura ran in and found her daughter gripping her leg, sobbing, begging it to stop. There were no marks. No blood. But the fear was real. Too real. The neighbors offered no help. The family lived on the 4th floor of an aging apartment building. The units above and below were either empty or occupied by people who didn't want to get involved. Their screams echoed down the hallway without answers. Hours later, a security guard arrived. He broke open the main door. He found nothing. No explanation. No cause. Night after night, the apartment felt alive. Objects vanished, then reappeared in places no one had been. Lights flickered, then died completely. Shadows stretched too far. Corners grew darker than they should. Even after prayers, routines, and every attempt at normalcy, the presence stayed. Waiting. The strain showed. Laura couldn't eat. She couldn't rest. The children became quiet, withdrawn. Emily's nightmares bled into her waking hours. The youngest began reacting to shadows that weren't there. Doctors found nothing wrong. They suggested anxiety, sleep paralysis, stress disorders. Even they admitted something didn't add up. No medication stopped the pressure. No explanation covered the sounds. By then, patterns emerged. The disturbances followed timing. The activity increased when fear peaked. Objects moved only when no one was watching. Whatever it was aware. By the end of 1993, the family was unrecognizable. What was supposed to be a fresh start in a quiet New Jersey apartment had turned into constant vigilance, constant fear. Their home was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. And this was only the beginning, because whatever had awakened inside that apartment wasn't finished. It was just getting started. The new year brought no relief. If anything, the apartment felt hungrier. The family had barely survived the previous months, but whatever lived there now seemed more aware, more attentive to their fear. The small disturbances, the misplaced objects, the faint whispers, were gone. What replaced them was undeniable, violent. Laura's body began to fail. She lost weight at an alarming rate. Her hands shook constantly. Her heartbeat skipped and raced without warning. Hospital visits became routine. Blood tests, scans, monitors. Doctors found nothing. They spoke softly about stress, anxiety, trauma. Even they admitted that the family's experiences didn't fit neatly into any diagnosis. Nights were the worst. Laura stopped sleeping in the bedrooms. She slept on the living room floor with the children beside her, believing that staying close might protect them. It didn't. The presence ignored logic. Shadows moved along the walls, not cast by anything, darker than normal, stretching with intention. They slipped under doors, curled around corners. The children woke screaming, claiming they saw figures crawling across the ceiling or standing silently at the foot of the couch, watching. Emily, the oldest, began sleepwalking. She whispered warnings no one understood, words about it coming closer, about not letting it touch them. One night, Laura woke to sharp, freezing pressure crushing her chest. She was on the floor. Her body refused to move. Her mouth wouldn't open. At the edge of the room she saw it, or thought she did. A shape, tall, undefined. Not a body, not a shadow. Something in between. The pressure increased. Claws, unseen but felt, dug into her skin. Beside her, one of the children whimpered in their sleep. Laura could do nothing. She prayed silently. That was all she had left. Then the marks began appearing. Emily complained of scratches, pinches, burning pain. One morning, the youngest boy ran to Laura crying. Red welts covered his arms and legs. No one else had touched him. The apartment had. Desperate, Laura reached out to a local clergy member, someone she trusted. He came often, walking through the apartment, speaking prayers, performing protective rites. For a time, the worst of it eased. Objects stopped flying. The violent attacks slowed. But the pressure at night never stopped. The shadows never left. The feeling of being watched never faded. By mid-year, Laura collapsed during an attack. Her body shook violently. Her breathing turned shallow. Her heart raced out of control. Emily called for help. At the hospital, tests again showed nothing. Healthy. Normal. Doctors diagnosed panic attacks and extreme stress. But the family knew better. Their home was doing this. Emily began seeing things. She woke at night to figures hovering over her siblings. Featureless shapes bending close, their intent unmistakable. By the time Laura reached the room, they were gone. Emily withdrew into herself. Her laughter disappeared. Her eyes stayed fixed on corners no one else watched. The youngest children regressed. They refused to sleep alone, clung to Laura or Emily constantly. They whispered about scratching sounds, about shadows moving when the lights were off. Laura tried to comfort them, but deep down she understood something terrible. The apartment was feeding on them, on their fear, on their exhaustion, on their breaking minds, and it wasn't done yet. One night, Laura woke to the sound of Emily screaming. Her body shook violently, eyes wide with panic. She pointed at the ceiling. Laura followed her gaze and froze. The ceiling fan, old, carefully maintained, was spinning violently on its own. The blades sliced through the dim light, casting grotesque, twisting shadows across the room. The children screamed, trying to flee, but it was as if the air itself mocked them. Only frantic prayers, whispered with every ounce of will, finally brought the fan to a stop. But the terror didn't leave. Laura realized something chilling. The attacks grew stronger when her husband was away. He had been gone for nearly a year working abroad. Financial support came sporadically. Emotional presence, absent. The apartment thrived on that void. It struck when the family was weakest, when fear was most abundant. One afternoon, Laura discovered another warning. While tidying the living room, she noticed small, deliberate scratches in the carpet. Shallow. Clean. Impossible. No footprints. No explanation. The kids had been outside. No one else had access. Something inside the apartment had left a signature. A message. A reminder that it was aware. That it could strike at any moment. The psychological toll was crushing. Laura could no longer sleep safely, even with the children beside her. Every floorboard creak, every flicker of light, every gust of wind became a threat. She sat in the dark, whispering prayers, hoping it would spare them. But the presence never stopped watching. Emily's visions intensified. She described figures with elongated limbs, standing at the foot of her bed. No faces, no features, only intent, clear and malevolent. Her younger brother often mirrored her, claiming he saw the same forms. Even the youngest children, too young to explain, refused to enter rooms alone. The family kept calling on a trusted local clergy member. He visited frequently, reciting protective verses, instructing on daily rituals. Some of the minor disturbances eased, but the core force, the intelligent, oppressive presence, remained. It was adapting, learning, hunting. Laura's body continued to fail. Weight loss, insomnia, extreme fatigue, hands shaking uncontrollably. Even walking across the apartment felt like a trial. The children became withdrawn. Anxiety shaped every thought, every action. Their laughter disappeared, replaced with whispered fears and glances toward the shadows. Eventually, the family understood something terrifying. Their home was no longer a home. It had become a predator, aware of their routines, exploiting weaknesses, feeding on fear. Desperate, Laura made a choice. They would leave. No prayers, no medicine, no reason. Nothing could fight the force within those walls. They began packing, gathering the strength they had left. But the apartment had one final message. On the night before their departure, the living room erupted. Objects flew from shelves. Lights flickered violently. A shadow moved across the ceiling, fluid, unnatural, almost alive. Laura felt the weight on her chest again, heavier than ever. The apartment was trying to stop them. The children huddled together, trembling, crying. Laura prayed, every word a plea. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then silence. By morning they left. They carried only what they could carry, and a lifetime of scars. Laura never fully recovered. Emily and the younger children carried the trauma with them. Even years later, the memory was vivid. The fear, the shadows, the invisible hands. The apartment remained infamous. Neighbors and later tenants reported whispers in the hallways. Objects moved without explanation. Shadows appeared where none should exist. The apartment had never been a home. It had been a predator. Invisible, patient, deadly. And the family learned a hard truth. Some places are alive. They feed on the living. They leave scars you cannot see. They leave marks you cannot erase. And some lessons never fade. After leaving the apartment, the family stepped into a world that should have been ordinary. But for them, nothing felt normal anymore. The streets of suburban New Jersey, once familiar, now seemed alien. Every flickering streetlight, every creaking signboard, every stray dog in an alley triggered memories of shadows and suffocating nights. Laura, already fragile from months of terror, struggled to reclaim even a semblance of normalcy. Distance from the apartment did little to undo what had burrowed deep inside her. The sleepless nights, the psychological scars, the constant feeling of being watched. Her eldest daughter, Emily, carried the heaviest burden. She had witnessed things no child should ever see. Her mother pinned under invisible weight, hands scratching, pinching, and clawing, shadows hovering over her siblings. The collapse of her father's presence, so far away, so absent, leaving them vulnerable. Emily became hyper-aware. A door creaking at midnight sent her into frantic whispers. A shadow cast by a streetlight on the wall froze her in fear. She refused to sleep alone. She slept with her mother or younger siblings, desperate to know that the darkness held no more threats. The younger children were no less affected. Night terrors continued for weeks after leaving the apartment. Faceless figures haunted their dreams. Invisible pressures weighed down on them while they slept. Recurring images of floating shadows, the same ones that had haunted their old home, invaded even the safest spaces. Attempts to console them often failed. They would wake screaming, disoriented, terrified. Laura tried, but every cry only reinforced the trauma. Every panic-stricken call echoed in her mind, a reminder that the apartment's presence had followed them, invisible but persistent. Laura's own body began to fail. Hospital visits increased. Doctors observed rapid weight loss, tremors, signs of chronic stress. Yet nothing explained why a once healthy woman's body was collapsing. Tests returned normal. Blood work, ECG, scans, all fine. But her lived experience screamed otherwise. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic anxiety. The trauma wasn't only psychological. Physical marks lingered. Blue and purple bruises on the children's arms and legs refused to fade. Emily occasionally noticed faint scratch marks across her younger siblings' backs and shoulders. Doctors dismissed them as accidental or self-inflicted. But Emily and Laura knew better. They understood the apartment's shadow had left a signature, a permanent imprint of its malevolence. Financially, the family struggled as well. Laura's husband, still working abroad, sent money sporadically, but stability was elusive. Reliance on extended family became necessary, yet even there, isolation weighed heavily. Her aging parents could offer sympathy, but little practical support. The children's routines, school, college, extracurriculars, no longer felt like growth. They were exercises in coping, survival, managing fear that refused to leave, even after the apartment was gone. Every corner, every darkened hallway, every unexplained noise reminded them of what they had escaped. Emily, however, had developed a resilience born of necessity. She became the protector. For her siblings. For her mother. At night, she would wake and check each room. Doors locked. Windows secured. No shadow loitered near their beds. She monitored every creak, every flicker of light, every gust of wind. It gave a fragile sense of control. But at a cost. Emily rarely slept. And when she did, nightmares claimed her almost immediately. The lessons from the fourth-floor apartment, how fear could turn real, how invisible threats could strike, were not easily unlearned. The family sought spiritual guidance. Clergy visited, reciting protective prayers and rituals. But the lingering horror was psychological now. The apartment's presence had left marks that no blessing could erase. Emily began a journal. Every nightmare, every trace of fear, every lingering shadow. She wrote about her mother's nightly paralysis, her siblings' night terrors, the invisible weight of the apartment, and her own visions, faceless figures, shadows that followed them, the constant sensation of being watched. Yet the shadows were not confined to memory. Even in the new apartment, strange things persisted. Doors creaked open by themselves. Lights flickered with no cause. Objects moved slightly, just enough to unsettle anyone paying attention. Her younger brother came running one day, eyes wide. "A shadow moved across the living room," he whispered. "Like a person, but not." These were faint echoes of the apartment's malevolence. But the psychological strain was real. Every small incident reminded them of the terror they had survived. Laura's health continued to decline. Weight loss, tremors, chronic insomnia. Her reliance on Emily grew daily. Emily balanced school and caregiving. The strain was immense. Yet she persisted, driven by fear, responsibility, and love. The family faced social misunderstanding. Neighbors, friends, and extended family struggled to comprehend. "You're imagining it. It's just stress." Even well-meaning advice minimized their experiences. This isolation magnified the trauma. Emily's nightmares became detailed, almost predictable. She would dream of the fourth-floor apartment. Shadows crawling across the ceiling. Invisible hands pressing on her mother. Objects flying through the air. She awoke in cold sweats, clutching her siblings, trying to convince herself it was over. Yet even in daylight, her memories triggered physical reactions. Rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, trembling. The apartment had become more than a place. It was now a mental and emotional presence, embedded in the family's psyche. The younger children struggled socially and academically. Fear and anxiety disrupted learning. Every sudden sound startled them. Teachers noticed, but could do little beyond counseling. Emily took responsibility for her siblings' safety and education. But the burden was heavy. The apartment's legacy had shifted. Less about violent events. More about persistent, invisible trauma shaping every waking moment. Laura, despite her frailty, remained a stabilizing presence. She encouraged routines. She created safe spaces. She urged spiritual support. But even she could not escape the mental toll. Flashbacks stole hours. Panic attacks struck at the slightest sound or movement. The apartment's psychological chains were as real as physical restraints. 2 years after leaving, the family slowly rebuilt a semblance of life. Laura's health stabilized somewhat. Children returned to school and college routines. But the trauma lingered. Emily, now a teenager, began therapy. She learned techniques to manage panic, anxiety, and hypervigilance. Spiritual practices remained important. But recovery required both practical and emotional strategies. Yet the shadow of the apartment persisted. Doors creaked without reason. Shadows flickered in peripheral vision. Objects misplaced in ways that defied explanation. These minor occurrences were reminders. The malevolent force they had encountered was not gone. It had left its mark. Its legacy endured. Laura's husband eventually returned from abroad. But family dynamics were irreversibly changed. Trauma had fractured relationships. Responsibilities shifted. Vigilance became instinct. Emily became the emotional anchor, mediator, protector. The apartment's horrors had matured them prematurely, shaping perspectives that would last a lifetime. The family's story became a cautionary tale. Neighbors whispered about the fourth-floor apartment. Its history was passed along quietly. Some traumas are not confined to a location. The apartment was the catalyst, but its legacy persisted. Shadows no longer lurked constantly. Objects no longer flew through the air. But the fear remained. The hypervigilance. The chronic anxiety. They had escaped physically. But the apartment's influence lingered, a haunting testament to the power of fear, trauma, and the unknown. Years had passed since the family fled the apartment on Maple Street. The youngest children, now young adults, had grown under the shadow of trauma. Laura, who had spent her teenage years as their guardian, carried the weight of adulthood intertwined with memories of fear and helplessness. The apartment had been abandoned, its doors sealed. But its legacy lingered. Karen's death, though long past, was never forgotten. In family conversations and journals Laura kept in secret, Her memory remained a reminder of what had been lost, and of what could still haunt them. The psychological scars ran deep. Dreams still reflected the horrors they endured. Floating shadows, invisible pressures, whispers in empty rooms. Yet the family knew something had to change. Fear could no longer dominate their lives. Laura decided to confront the source. She began investigating the old apartment, determined to understand its malevolence and ensure it could harm no one else. From the street, she could sense it, a weight in the air, a darkness pulsing with silent menace. Her younger siblings joined her, cautious but resolute. The building was boarded up, windows covered, walls weathered by years of neglect. Locals whispered of the fourth-floor flat. No one dared approach. Together they entered. The air was thick, almost viscous, carrying memories of terror from decades ago. Dust floated in thin rays of sunlight that struggled through grime-covered windows. Every corner seemed alive with echoes of fear. Laura moved toward the fourth-floor door, the epicenter of their suffering. The lock was rusted, but the door held firm. Her heart raced as she remembered. Her mother paralyzed in sleep, invisible hands pinching and scratching, objects flying, shadows twisting in impossible ways. She turned the handle. The door creaked open. The apartment was frozen in time. No movement. No shadows. But the presence remained, subtle, heavy, pressing against her chest. She scanned the room. The outline of her mother's old bed remained in the center, dust-covered yet unmistakable. Laura knelt, pressing her hand to the worn fabric. Memories of unseen forces, invisible pressures, and whispers surfaced vividly. Taking a deep breath, she performed a ceremony of her own. Incense, water, prayers. She marked the corners of the room. Acknowledgement of the presence, of the fear, of their survival. For the first time in decades, the oppressive weight lifted slightly. The shadows did not vanish entirely, but their hold was broken. As they exited the apartment, the neighborhood seemed unchanged. Quiet streets, ordinary buildings. Yet something within them had shifted. The apartment's legacy, though not erased, had been confronted. For Laura and her siblings, this was a turning point. They understood something vital. Fear, while persistent, could be met with awareness, courage, and deliberate action. The apartment had haunted them for years, but now, they had reclaimed themselves. In the weeks following their final visit to the apartment, Laura meticulously documented every detail. She took photographs, made sketches, and wrote down every sensation. The pressure that pressed down at night, the whispering that seemed to come from nowhere, the fleeting shapes that lingered just beyond vision. Her purpose was twofold. First, to create a record for herself and her siblings, a way to process and acknowledge the apartment's lingering legacy. Second, to provide insight for anyone who might encounter spaces filled with unexplained terror. Life slowly resumed some semblance of normalcy. Laura, now more confident in confronting the echoes of trauma, guided her younger siblings in creating routines that emphasized safety, awareness, and control. They learned to tell the difference between residual fear and actual danger. Nightmares still came, but they were shorter, less vivid, and increasingly manageable. School, work, and social life began to feel possible again. The memory of Karen, their mother, remained a source of grief, but no longer of terror. Quiet rituals and remembrance allowed the family to honor her strength and sacrifices. And while the memory of the unseen forces that had haunted the apartment lingered, they understood something important. Some mysteries would never be solved, but their power could be contained by awareness and courage. As adults, Laura and her siblings recognized how profoundly the apartment had shaped them. They carried scars, both visible and invisible, but those scars held lessons. Vigilance, empathy, resilience, and the necessity of confronting fear directly. They shared their story sparingly with those who could bear its weight, and the tale of the Maple Street apartment became both a warning and a testament. Trauma, supernatural or psychological, can linger, but human agency and courage remain potent. Years later, Laura returned to the street where the apartment had stood. The building was condemned, slated for demolition. Workers cleared debris while sunlight touched walls that had once held so many shadows. She felt a strange sense of closure. The physical structure of fear would vanish, but the lessons, the scars, and the legacy of survival would remain. She thought of her mother, her siblings, and herself. She thought of the invisible forces that had once dominated their lives. And she realized that while fear could shape life, it did not have to define it. Through confrontation, awareness, and resilience, they had reclaimed control. The shadows were not destroyed, but they had been met, acknowledged, and survived. The Maple Street apartment, though gone, would continue to exist, in memory, in whispers, and in cautionary tales. But the family who endured it now stood taller, stronger, and wiser. They had faced the unimaginable, confronted forces beyond comprehension, and emerged, not unscarred but empowered. Sometimes the most terrifying battles are not fought with visible enemies, but with shadows, memory, and the human mind itself.